Hey, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we're really excited to be part of CBP's virtual conference. It's amazing to think that this is the third one, and it's been a year in the pandemic. But I'm really excited that Andrew has the opportunity, or he's given the industry the opportunity to connect virtually. My name's JoAnne Carilli-Stevenson. With me, I have Jacob Hoover. We work with White Labs. And today we just wanted to talk to you a little bit about White Labs Brewing Company, which we refer internally is from cell to sip. And we just want to talk to you guys and give you a little bit of background on the brewing company, why this is so important to White Labs, how this helps our customers, and kind of some of the things that we're able to do within our company because of the brewing company. So I'll get started, and then Jacob, on what I'm going to do, just to make it easy, is I'm going to lead into some questions so that you can jump in, as Jacob is responsible for White Labs Sensory Program, part of our education staff, and oversees our tasting room in San Diego. So just a little bit of background on White Labs Brewing Company. White Labs Brewing Company is part of White Labs Yeast Supply, if you want to say yeast supplier company. We started in 2012 with a small tasting room in San Diego, and then expanded on the brewing company with a restaurant in our Asheville location in 2017. So Jacob, do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about what is the whole premise of when you walk into either of our locations when it comes to our beer?
Yeah, so walking into White Labs Kitchen and Tap or San Diego Tap Room, one of the things we want to invoke in our customers the immediate sense of science, obviously beer and brewing science, fermentation science, as well as the feeling of education, or the feeling of like trying to invoke questions out of our customers and all learn together about these things. So you walk in, there's beakers or Erlenmeyer flasks as lights hanging from the ceiling. We have Erlenmeyer flasks on the table with flowers, and our draft system has all these gadgets and pressure regulators and things like that. So we're trying to instill a sense of learning and education there. From there, you'll look at our menu, and it looks a little bit different than a production brewery would, where we have a beer style or a name of a beer like anywhere else, but underneath of that style we have usually 2 strains of yeast listed. And what that means is we're taking our 10-barrel batch of wort and we're splitting it into 2 of our 5-barrel fermenters back in the brew house and doing essentially split batch fermentations on the same recipe. And by doing so, we can then serve 2 4-ounce tasters to our customers and allow them to experience how that fermentation has changed the entire tasting experience, whether it be aroma, flavor, mouthfeel, things like that. So walking in, the whole time, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming if you're just not expecting it, but it's a great experience. I did it before I was ever an employee, and thought it was so super cool. So we just always try to connect with whoever it is walking through the door, whether it be your brewmaster or someone who just picked up homebrew.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too, Jacob, as you said, it's like one of the things about our brewing company is that we're allowing the consumer to be exposed to the impact of yeast and fermentation. So, again, when you walk in, you can really have that entire experience, like we said, from cell to sip, where you actually, at both locations, you can also take a tour and understand yeast production, what that looks like, what that is for the industry. And then you walk outside and you walk into the tasting room, or you walk into our kitchen and tap, and we're really trying to expose that consumer to, this is the difference. You can have an IPA with a 008 East Coast Ale, and it's a hazy IPA, or 001 and it's a West Coast IPA. And by exposing the consumer to the impact, it gives us an opportunity to actually help our customers, because the more educated a consumer is, the more apt they're to try craft beer, or even food. In Kitchen and Tap, we also take this even one step further when we open up the restaurant, is really looking at how to utilize, again, the yeast in food production. So we use our yeast for pizza dough. We do fermented foods. Again, when we deal with fermentation, as everybody knows, there's a complexity there, right? On flavor profile, on aroma, as Jacob said. And so again, exposure to the consumer. But I want to flip it because, a lot of people will say, well, the brewing company, you're out there, that's great, you're helping us. But really, from a brewery perspective, one of the things that this gives us an advantage over some of the other suppliers is that we actually brew with our yeast. We understand our yeast. We do sensory on the beers that we make. And so, Jacob, do you want to kind of talk about how we utilize the brewery to test the strains, to, what information we're pulling about the strains that we use, and how we actually disseminate that information that could help the yeast side and our yeast customers?
Yeah, definitely. So every batch that comes out, we are running through our analytical laboratory on site in San Diego. So we're able to see all the data from everything, and we can alter things like pitch count, pitch rates, fermentation temperatures, different variables throughout those different fermentations, and see how that affects all the data that we're then given. And the cool thing is we can also then communicate that to our customers that are interested in maybe knowing how much of ethyl acetate or a certain ester compound was produced, or to the consumer that's looking at how did the ABV change and the attenuation rates change between the two fermentations. So every time we get all that data, we're looking at it, we're compiling it, and then we're trying to put it into a format that is easily consumable for that customer through our menu. So when you walk in, we have our QR codes now with the days of COVID, and you take a picture, it pulls up our tap list, and in that tap list you can click on more beer info and see all this data right in front of you. We have attenuation graphs, we have pH drop graphs, measuring anything from diacetyl to acetaldehyde to ester compounds, and I think this is a great way for our consumers to see how these strains are affecting it on a analytical level, affecting the batch of beer, but then as well, they can then go and taste that and have that affirmation right in front of them of what they're reading.
Yeah, and to that point, right, we've started to, on the White Labs Brewing Co. website, if you were to look for that analytical data, you can click on any of the beers and it has more info. And so we have these full analytical sheets that are available for the public, so that, like Jacob said, if a brewer is interested in a specific strain but isn't sure about, what is it going to look like, I really want more information, this is a great way. And having a brewery gives us an opportunity to share this information with the brewers. So it is, like I said, it is available on our Brewing Co. website. And it's really important to us to be able to share this information with our customers, obviously. So Jacob, do you want to talk a little bit about, as we're talking about the evolution of the brewing company and how it ties into kind of White Labs' mission on the yeast side, a little bit about our White Labs new canning project and what that's done and how it's helped us, also really understand what our customers have been going through?
Yeah, definitely. So, when the COVID or when the pandemic hit, we were unable to have our tasting room open for a while, like everywhere else, and draft sales were down. We weren't able to really connect with our customer and have them experience what we do. It's a very on-site, it's a destination. It's somewhere where you come to have that full experience of the taster side by side, and you can't really get that with 32-ounce, growlers or crowlers to go. It's a lot of beer to open up at one single time if you're tasting two different beers side by side. So we wanted to package it in a way that the experience could be taken home and people could still see the wonderful world of fermentation. So we ended up doing a split batch canning run back in July for the first time of our Tabor IPA, which is our West Coast IPA base wort recipe. And then we ferment it with our California Ale Yeast 001 and our 008 East Coast Ale Yeast. And it creates two distinctly different beers. One's very West Coast forward in nature. You're getting a lot of more pine and grapefruit and woody qualities out of the hops, whereas the East Coast it's much more fruit forward, and it's an awesome flight to taste side by side. So we ended up canning those two, and it was a great success. We gained a lot of insight and experience into the canning process as a supplier, as a yeast supplier. as well as we were able to, like JoAnne said, really understand the climate for our customers as well, both on the pro and the home brewing side.
And Jacob, can you talk a little bit about, because again, one of the reasons that we really, if you want to say, are very dedicated to the brewing company is the ability to garner the education. Can you talk a little bit about some of the virtual tastings that you've been able to do with our beer, and your approach to exposing somebody to the impact of fermentation, right? And just utilizing the cans and the virtual events that you've been doing.
Yeah. We've been doing this really cool class called Challenge Your Taste Buds. And we've actually been using it in sync with Lindsay Barr from Draft Labs, and she also has now Sample Ox, which is a more customer-facing sensory software app. And we've been utilizing that as a fun way to have the public sign up and walk them through essentially what would be like a sensory panel session on our canned beers. So the fact that we can now can in 16-ounce sample sizes is allowed us to have them take it home, do the side-by-side comparison over Zoom as a group. Using Zoom, we'll do breakout rooms once we kind of branch off for the tasting experience, so everyone can do it by themselves. And then we come back together afterwards and we talk about it. And what that app allows them to do is walk through the sample step by step and choose, essentially answer what they're experiencing, whether it be the appearance, aroma, flavor, or mouthfeel. And this is both valuable because it's very on brand for White Labs. We're invoking education, teaching on fermentation and how the science is imparting flavor and aroma in the beer, while also getting feedback for our brewing company on our consumers' perception, because they are able to answer what they're perceiving as well as how much they're enjoying the sample at the same time. And by doing so, this is a great way to kind of, sometimes these things can be intimidating, especially to someone that's not, has not been in the industry for a long time and using this kind of language daily. And it's a very, like I said, approachable manner to walk into it's a similar software app on your phone, just like anything else. And then you can have these broad overarching categories like citrus, like sweet, aromatic, and cereal, and things like this that you can click on, and they kind of help lead you to what you're perceiving. And by doing so, when I'm teaching on fermentation and we talk about ester compounds and how they're these fruity flavors, it's much easier once the customer has perceived a fruity flavor to connect that back to yeast and fermentation than it is to just say on a slide, ethyl acetate, red apple, or palm character, and have them really understand what that means and how that's going to show up in the finished product. So it's been an awesome experience. Even virtually, it's been I think a really great way to connect with our customers here in San Diego.
What do you think, from your perception and from doing these courses, it's like, what is one takeaway that we can say from if you want to say from our brewing side of the business, that the takeaway for our yeast customers that you can share, working in a brewery for a supplier,
Mm-hmm.
What are your learnings that we could bring to our yeast customers from our experience with what we're doing, if you say, in San Diego and Nashville?
Yeah. So like what can we
share that would be beneficial for our customers who have tasting rooms, with our experience of education and our interactions with the general public about yeast and fermentation, that we can share that would be helpful for them in their tasting rooms?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I've learned working in the tasting room is, the people you have working, behind the bar and the staff there, and making sure that that we're all using the same language and that they understand, what we're trying to accomplish and how to communicate best with the consumer. And to, in our tasting room, we're always trying to, like I said, use education as a tool for essentially growing the industry and helping create an educated consumer. And I think, teaching your staff is such a crucial component of that, and making sure that they they fully understand every aspect of what you're trying to do. So, using our staff on our sensory panel and helping, like allowing them to do classes and things like this behind the bar, so that they are able to walk the customer through the same things like the tasting experience, fermentation, metabolites, and how they taste and things like that has been crucial for us. And I think would be something that, every brewery could benefit from, making sure that, they're communicating your brands properly and that they're understanding how certain flavors are coming about through the process.
So I know, Jacob, you have done some, again, education classes for some of the local breweries. What does that look like, right? I mean, you've brought breweries in and done education kind of on, sensory and beer flavor, beer quality, right? Like, again, we're looking at it specifically from the yeast aspect and the fermentation aspect. And, what does that look like? And what are the type of questions that you get from breweries when they come in for these trainings, right? Again, the more that we can share with our customers about what we've learned in interacting with other breweries or educating other breweries on, through our beer, what kind of questions do you get? What kind of gaps have you seen? And, what takeaways could you give to some of our customers based on the interactions that you've had with the education trainings we've done for different breweries and their tasting room staff?
Yeah, so we host a lot of breweries here locally, and they'll come on site, and we'll set up a little essentially Yeast 101 and tasting experience, and then also take them for a tour throughout the facility so they can see how the yeast is actually produced. And when they come on site, they sit down, and we have one of our tasting side-by-side split batch fermentations, set down in front of them, and we'll run through a little PowerPoint. And I would say that the biggest things that I see that they're asking or wondering about is one big one is, how are these yeast strains different, and at what point did they become different? Why do they not all do the same thing? And so that's a big one I would say that's kind of maybe missed sometimes, is just teaching people how yeast strains have been naturally selected by brewers for hundreds of years, to essentially make something that tastes good. And for most of that time, they didn't know they were doing that. They weren't doing it on purpose. They were just using something that made the beer taste good and using it over again. And so that has led to, all these different ale strains, all these different lager strains, wild yeast and bacteria as well. So that's a big one, just helping them understand that, because then you can go into the conversation of, well, they're very regional. There's a lot of regionality in yeast, and we can look at this and see that American ale strains are, predominantly clean, versus Belgian ale strains, are very ester and phenolic forward. They're going to add a lot of character, a lot of flavor and aroma into that beer. And that's a huge concept, because then knowing that and having that in your lexicon, you can already go into when talking about a beer to a customer. If you have a Saison versus your IPA and they're asking how they're different, well, knowing that these yeast strains are from different areas of the world and they're going to impart different flavors, that's a huge component of those two styles of beer, and being able to explain that. And I think that's another common question that we're asked, and that's something that could be that's relatively simple, that could be explained and helps people. It's almost like an aha moment, and we get that a lot with our even our public customers as well. And then we'll walk through the tasting flight and allow them to see that side by side, how that's different. And it's always fascinating, because a lot of these members that are coming in, they have a lot of tasting experience, or they're very in tune with what they're perceiving and how to describe it, but maybe not always whether or not that flavor is yeast induced, or how the yeast has affected that flavor profile. Has it left more sugar after the fermentation, creating more body? Has it accentuated the hop character so that maybe there's a touch more bitterness and more hop flavor and aroma? Or is it pulling out malt derived character, and you're getting some type of toast or sweet aromatic that you didn't get in the other one? So these little nuances, I think, are where the professional customers have come in and been really surprised about how that yeast has changed the two side by side. And I think that's invaluable. That tasting experience is invaluable to really connect with what we're saying sometimes in a more dry PowerPoint manner or something like that.
Yeah, I'm right with you. Not really a big fan of PowerPoint and or emails that just come through without context, right? And I think
Right.
that's part of the reason, right? Like that our brewing company is so impactful is that you do get to directly experience, you know, those beers, that impact. And like I said, and then we get to share all of that analytical data, all of that information with our customers so that when they're asking about a specific yeast strain or a specific beer style, we can say, well, this is why we recommend this yeast for that beer style, or this is, here's your options. And we have so much data on the back end to be able to really reinforce the different flavor profiles. From the brewing company standpoint, we obviously use our brewing company as well to develop new strains or to test new strains to see if there's going to be a commercial market for them. Can you explain a little bit more about, how that works with the brewery? Again, obviously we have an idea. I know we're working on a couple new strains right now, another hazy strain, hazy blend. What does that process look like, and how do we get to utilize our brewery to actually take that information and disseminate it when we launch a new strain?
Yeah. So obviously that's a really exciting part of the job working at White Labs and getting to kind of learn as you go from the scientists working on these, and then get to have that final experience of tasting it and seeing what it produced. So in our brew house, we have the main 20 barrel system that we're using, but we also have a 1 barrel pilot system. So a lot of these experimental strains or blends or things like that that we're working on to come out with are going to be produced on this 1 barrel system. But then once we get it to tap, or once we have it run through sensory panel, sometimes if it's a beer made from start to finish to be a beer served, we will put it on tap and allow our customers to give us feedback as well. And we've done this multiple times in the past where we've created a survey or kind of a list of maybe 10 questions rating someone, how much someone likes something. A lot of times we're doing a side-by-side as well. So you're rating two samples, one versus each other. Maybe we're using an existing strain that we already have, and then next to this new experimental, and getting feedback that way as well. We've used the sample lock software I was speaking on for our Challenger Taste Bud events. We've used that as well for sometimes customer facing information and getting feedback that way too. So it's always it's always great to see what we talk about inside the company, but sometimes you can get so pigeonholed with the lexicon and talking about yeast every day that we need our customers that don't have as much experience with the yeast and with the flavor production of these strains to give us some feedback as well to really understand how these new strains are performing. Obviously looking at the data is a huge part of this, making sure that it's doing what we are intending it to do, and then bringing all that information together so that we can digest it and formulate a plan for how we're going to release it and how it's going to affect the industry.
Yeah, it's always one of my fun things in the background when we have someone that either wants to, talk to us about a new strain or we're talking about releasing a new strain. Just the process that we have internally to go through it, right? It's not like we're just testing it in the lab. We actually get to brew with it. And then we get to all taste it. And then we go, oh yeah, and I know, for the audience here, we've been doing some recent testing and, there have been times we've put out a strain and we brew a beer with it. And then we go, no, wait, this isn't, we're not ready. We don't want it. We don't want to release it. And so having the ability to do that prior to releasing something that we recognize the market, it really isn't ready for, or it's not up to snuff, right? The yeast is not performing the way that we expect. We can make sure that we're not putting something out into the industry that people don't like. So I don't know if anybody on the call has any questions or comments, but please, if you do, put them into the comments. We'd love to hear. We're happy to answer any questions about, the aspect of our brewing company and how this interacts with our yeast side of the business. But I want to continue this discussion because obviously, White Labs Brewing Company or the tasting room is going to be 10 years in 2022. And so maybe you want to talk to a little bit about where we're going with our canning series, our beer series, what we're trying to showcase on the fermentation and yeast side as we move forward into our 10th year.
Yeah. So yeah, exciting stuff coming up, finally coming out of this time, being able to welcome customers back on site for tasting. This week is our first week where we're opening up to almost a full week schedule of hours. We were only doing 3 days before, and being more of this, this experience focused destination tasting room. I'm going to love seeing people from around the country start to come in again and experience what we do. So some exciting things that we're looking forward to is, with our canning and we're doing some one-off bottles. We're going to be calling these the Scientist series. So, Tabor IPA is an example of that I spoke on earlier with the 001 versus 008 comparison. And this series is highlighting famous scientists that have been, have played a huge role in our understanding of yeast and fermentation over the last 150 or more years. So that's a series of beer styles. We have an IPA, we have a Hefeweizen, a porter, and we'll continue to be doing that and canning those up to feature the side-by-sides as well. In addition to that, we have what's called a cellar series coming out, which is really exciting. And we'll be featuring some beers with more of the wild yeast and bacteria side of things. We don't often release too many things in the tasting room featuring these different organisms, just due to the fact that our brew house is also producing a lot of food for our production and things like that. So we always try to limit, obviously, any kind of bug exposure back there. So we are going to be experimenting more in a one-off bottle series, small batch runs, vintage dates, something that you can store in a cellar. And I'm really excited about that.
Haven't we recently done the first one?
Yeah, I believe the first one is finishing up and going into bottles to be bottle conditioned with a Brettanomyces strain here very shortly. So I saw the labels recently, and I cannot wait to see that.
All right, so give everybody insight, because I haven't even seen the labels. So you're one up on me right now.
Yes, I mean, it's a saison. We brewed a saison, and we're going to be bottle conditioning it and doing it with Brett, and then we're going to be, like I said, vintage dates. It's going to be our cellar series. We're going to keep doing this, utilizing different organisms. And the whole idea is, we want to connect on that side of the yeast supplier, right? We're doing a lot of ale and lager fermentations in our tasting room, but not a lot of wild yeast and bacteria stuff. So we're trying to, I think it'd be really cool to have something from White Labs that you can store in your cellar for a year or two and open that up and bring that out as a conversation starter, and maybe something that we can then here locally do classes on and talk about that side as well, more in depth, because we haven't done too much of that in the past. So really, really excited about that here moving forward.
Yeah.
We also have another canning series called the Temperature series, where we're naming our products after the temperature of fermentation. We've been doing a lot more of that here recently and discussing fermentation profiles a little bit more in the tasting room. Something that we did recently that was really, really fascinating was we did a WLP 029 German Kolsch ale yeast fermentation at 2 different fermentation temperatures. One that I believe was at 10 Celsius, it was more than that. It was at 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry, that's a little bit low. And then also 63 degrees Fahrenheit. And we did a side-by-side comparison for customers utilizing that. And that was a big hit, because people, they think, oh, different yeast, I'm expecting something to be different, no matter what their level of education on beer is. But when you're talking fermentation temperature, a lot of times they wouldn't guess that this would have such a big effect. And the beers actually came out, relatively different in terms of, being the same base recipe. You could tell there's distinct differences in the way the hops were expressed and the way the malt character was expressed as well. So we'll be doing more of that in cannons here moving forward, which I'm also really excited about, and to see how people react and enjoy them.
So as we move forward with the Temperature series, and I got to taste the Kolsch's actually when I was out in Asheville recently, and they are very unique beers. They are not the same. And so, moving forward, like, what other beer styles do you feel like the Temperature series are really going to make sense with? so that it really highlights the difference, again, and sometimes it's even 2 to 3 degrees, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what other beers do you think we'll start looking at, or you want to start looking at in regards to the temperature series?
Yeah, something I would be excited about that I think that a large portion of the industry would be excited about too is Belgian strains side by side at different fermentation temperatures, because a lot of these strains you can see going up to, in the 80s. And if we did a typical ale fermentation at maybe 70 or 68 versus an 80 plus degree fermentation, that would be, I know that's a huge gap and you're expecting more of a difference because of that, but that would be really fun to taste side by side. And I know we've done trials back in R&D and things like that, but something that the customer could experience and taste as well would be really exciting. I think using flake strains, maybe one at 95 versus something that in the typical ale temperatures could be really interesting and fun to taste, because that's, to our customers, that's something that's relatively new and they find really fascinating just because of the history of it and the way that it's kind of come onto the market and how popular it's become in such a short period of time. So anything revolving, strains that can be extremely different would be, I think, a fun thing to taste for everyone.
And then, like you said, it's like we do have the analytical data, so that if a brewer was interested, or hey, I'm really interested in 500. What does it look like at 65, say again, Fahrenheit, or what does it look like at 75? The nice part is, and this is again such a great aspect of our brewery, is that we have all that analytical data that we share, and it's public, so that they can actually see as they're developing a recipe, right, what that fermentation temperature, is going to do to their beer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Did that temperature change the production of higher alcohols? Did it change the amount of time it took for, to pass diacetyl? These are all things that we have, tons of data on, and that we can communicate and see how will help you formulate what you're trying to produce and how long you want it to take and things like that.
So to kind of finish up, give me your favorite. Again, you've been with White Labs now for a while, and involved in running our sensory program and really the development of these beers and taking this data, again, so that we can put it in a format that's easily shareable. What's the coolest part of your job? You basically are on the education aspect of a brewing company that's a yeast company.
Yeah, it's such a I sometimes I get so deep into it, I forget how cool it is that I get to work on both the beer side as well as the fermentation and yeast side, and I can't express enough how lucky I am and how much fun I have. And the coolest part I would say about it is because I get to come in and talk about beer and yeast fermentation every single day for the entire day, which sometimes you talk about so much, you're like, okay, I need a little bit of a break. But I mean, especially in the tasting room, people are coming in excited, and I get to feed off of that energy, that excitement, and I still feel the same way. I've, like you said, I've been working here for go over 3 years now, and every time we come out with a new split batch side by side fermentation, I'm just as excited to taste it as I was on my first day, because it's fun. It's such a cool concept. You never, you have a general idea of what you're going to get after doing it for so long and tasting these strains in so many different products. But at the same time, you never really know exactly how it's going to come out. And it's just so much fun. And then to see a customer come in, maybe with no foundation of this sort of thing, and their eyes light up when you start that when they start understanding it and getting it and seeing just how much there is to brewing science, fermentation science, and how we're using something that's, from nature. We're not creating these things to impart flavors into this beer. These yeast strains have been selected, and they're doing this naturally, and we're just kind of maybe pulling the strings and manipulating them a little bit, and for them to just have that moment where they're understanding it and they get to taste it right in front of them. I think it just teaches you so much faster, and you're able to understand it so much quicker when you can have something in front of you that is, taste is so impactful in the way we view our emotional connection to how we, perceive food and drinks and things like that. So to use that it's like, in school when are you a visual learner, or do you learn, by reading? And I think this is a great example of, visual to the next level, because you're being able to taste it right in front of you. And just to be able to talk to people every single day about it, and have them get fascinated and interested in it is so rewarding, as someone who's very passionate about it, and loves coming in every day to work on these projects and make things better and try to grow the industry. That's the cool thing about my job in White Labs in general, is that everyone there is doing what they're doing because they love it. They love the industry, and they want the industry to keep growing, keep progressing like it has over the last 20, 30, 40 years. We don't want to see that ever stop. And so the tasting room is just, I think, a pledge to that, and a great way to continue, educate. Like you said, the educated customer is a better customer, and just to keep pushing that information and getting it out there. Because I truly believe that if everyone knew what we knew about fermentation, beer, in every aspect of it, that at least I would hope most people would be as stoked on it as I am. So, like I said, it's such a cool part of the job, to really be able to connect with those customers on a daily basis, and then work to try to make things progress every day.
Yeah. It's just, I really appreciate your honesty, and your passion just makes me smile, because, again, the whole premise today was kind of sell to sip, and that's it, right? You walk into White Labs, we're producing yeast, we're producing beer, and throughout that entire process of what goes on, again, on our lab side, on our brewery side, on the hospitality side, we get to share that passion with, again, with our yeast customers. We get to with the home brewers, with the consumers that walk in. And to your point, it is always exciting when you're sitting there having a beer with somebody, or talking about a yeast strain. You go, oh, we had this beer. And then you get so excited, because we understand exactly, to your point, what the fermentation is doing to that final product,
Yeah.
and we get to be able to share our experience with fermentation through our beers. And again, I've been really excited to see us really develop the brewing company, and the sharing of the data that we are getting out of that brewing company with our customers, because it's helping them, and helping them understand, and helping the consumers understand. So thank you. Well, we're about 40 minutes in, so we'll just hang out if there's any questions. And if we don't get any questions in a couple, then we'll just go ahead and hang up, because we had 45 minutes scheduled. So if there's any questions, just put them into the comment box.
Yeah, thank you, JoAnne, for setting this up, and I had a blast talking about what we do, and the cool things about the tasting room here in San Diego.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's something that a lot of people know that we have, but to really experience from our eyes, it would be phenomenal.
Yeah, and sell to sip can't sum it up better, because we're taking something that's extremely complex, that is in-depth biochemistry in its highest extent, and trying to break that down into something that anyone of any background can connect with and understand. And that's sell to sip. That's what it means, and that's what we're trying to do. And I just love that so much. Coming from, I have a background in biology, and I studied biochemistry and things like that in college. And when I started at White Labs, I wasn't really familiar too much with fermentation science, with yeast in general, anything to do with brewing, yeast in brewing. I was very new to the industry, and immediately I was just hooked and fascinated, and I was able to really grasp, the bigger picture, immediately, and I wanted to know everything about it. And so to have that experience, and then to be able to see other people having kind of the same experience with me, is just, it's so cool.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I look forward to getting back to San Diego so that we can have a beer together.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we don't have any questions, so Jacob, I want to say thank you, and we can go ahead and hang up. And thank you to everybody who joined. And hopefully at some point we can see you guys in the tasting room, or if you're just curious about some of the analytical data that we have on all of our beers, because you're interested in a specific yeast strain, if you go to whitelabsbrewingco.com, we have all of that analytical data available on the World Wide Web. So thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.